Every single day, you walk through a minefield of emotional traps designed to pull you off center, to hijack your rational mind, and to make you react in ways you'll regret. Someone says something calculated to provoke you. A situation triggers your deepest insecurities. A person you care about withholds something you desperately want. And in that moment, you have a choice you probably don't even realize you're making. Do you fall into the trap, or do you see it for what it is and step around it? Most people spend their entire lives falling into the same traps repeatedly, wondering why they keep ending up in the same painful situations. The Stoics figured out how to outsmart these traps 2,000 years ago, and what they discovered is more relevant now than ever. If you've ever found yourself replaying a conversation in your head for hours, if you've ever been manipulated into a reaction you knew was exactly what someone wanted from you, if you've ever felt like your emotions are being played like an instrument by people who understand you better than you understand yourself, this is essential. And if you're ready to develop the kind of awareness that lets you see emotional manipulation coming from a mile away, subscribe now, because we're about to go deep into the psychology of emotional traps and the Stoic strategies for avoiding them entirely. The Stoics lived in a world of political intrigue where manipulation was a survival skill. In the Roman court, saying the wrong thing to the wrong person at the wrong time could mean exile or death. Reading people, understanding motives, seeing through manipulation, these weren't optional skills. They were necessities. And what the Stoics developed was a framework for understanding human nature so clearly that emotional manipulation became almost laughably transparent. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Choose not to be harmed, and you won't feel harmed. Don't feel harmed, and you haven't been." This sounds almost absurd at first. Someone betrays you, insults you, attacks you. How can you choose not to be harmed? But Marcus wasn't talking about physical harm. He was talking about emotional and psychological harm, and he was pointing to a profound truth. Most of the harm we experience in life is harm we allow by how we interpret events and respond to them. An emotional trap is essentially an invitation to harm yourself. Someone does or says something calculated to trigger a specific response in you: anger, jealousy, insecurity, fear, defensiveness. If you take the bait, if you respond from that triggered place, you've fallen into the trap. You've allowed external circumstances to control your internal state. You've handed someone else the remote control to your emotional life. And that's exactly what they wanted, whether they were conscious of it or not. Understanding this changes everything, because once you see emotional traps clearly, once you understand the mechanics of how they work, they lose most of their power. It's like watching a magic trick after you know how it's done. You can still see the magician's hands moving, but the illusion doesn't work on you anymore. You see the technique instead of experiencing the magic. Let's start with the most common emotional trap: provocation, designed to make you react emotionally so you'll look unreasonable. Someone says something insulting or dismissive in a calm tone. If you respond with anger, you look like you're overreacting. If you defend yourself, you look defensive and insecure. If you ignore it, you feel like you're letting them get away with disrespect. Every option feels like a loss, which is the point. The trap is designed so that any emotional response confirms their narrative about you. Research in emotional intelligence confirms what the Stoics understood. The person who maintains composure in the face of provocation is perceived as more competent, more trustworthy, and more powerful than the person who reacts emotionally. The trap works by making you think you need to respond, that silence or non-engagement is weakness. But actually, emotional reaction is the weakness. Composure is the strength. Epictetus taught his students to distinguish between what's up to us and what's not up to us. Someone's attempt to provoke you? Not up to you. Your response to that attempt? Completely up to you. The trap only works if you confuse these categories, if you think you have to respond to their provocation because they made the first move. But you don't. Their action is their action. Your response is your choice. These are separate things. Think about what's actually happening in a provocation. Someone wants you to react emotionally. Why? Usually because emotional reactions make you predictable and controllable. When you're angry, you're not thinking clearly. When you're defensive, you're explaining rather than acting. When you're hurt, you're vulnerable to further manipulation. Your emotional state becomes a weakness they can exploit. So they provoke that state intentionally, often without even consciously understanding what they're doing. The Stoic solution is awareness, not suppression of emotion. The Stoics weren't about pretending you don't feel. The solution is awareness of the gap between stimulus and response. Someone says something provocative. That's the stimulus. You feel anger rising. That's your initial emotional response, which is automatic and not fully under your control. But what happens next? Whether you act on that anger, whether you let it control your behavior, whether you fall into the trap they've set, that's completely under your control. This gap, this space between feeling and acting, is where your freedom lives. Viktor Frankl, who wasn't a Stoic but understood the same principle, wrote, "Between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom." The emotional trap tries to collapse this space, to make stimulus and response happen so quickly that you don't even realize you had a choice. Seneca wrote extensively about anger, which he considered the most dangerous emotion precisely because it obliterates this space. When you're angry, you feel justified in your reaction. Anger makes you feel powerful and righteous. But actually, anger is weakness masquerading as strength. It's the emotion you feel when you've lost control and you're trying to regain it through force. And anyone who can make you angry can control you, because anger makes you predictable. Consider how emotional traps play out in relationships. Your partner knows exactly what to say to make you defensive, to make you over-explain, to make you feel guilty. They may not do it consciously or maliciously, but they know your buttons because they've pushed them before. If you're not aware of this dynamic, you'll fall into the same trap every single time. They'll say the thing, you'll react the way you always react, and the same unproductive pattern will play out again. But what if you saw it coming? What if, when they started to say the triggering thing, you felt the trap activating and instead of falling into it, you paused? What if you felt the defensiveness rising and instead of launching into explanation, you simply said, "I'm not going to have this conversation right now"? What if you recognized that the trap only works if you play your part, and you simply refused to play it? This is the Stoic way. Not avoiding conflict when it's necessary. Not suppressing your legitimate feelings. But recognizing when someone is trying to manipulate your emotional state and refusing to cooperate with that manipulation. It's seeing the trap and stepping around it rather than into it. And once you start practicing this, once you start catching these traps in real time, your life changes dramatically. The most sophisticated emotional traps are the ones that look like opportunities. Someone offers you something you want but attaches conditions that compromise your values or your peace. A job opportunity that pays well but requires you to betray your integrity. A relationship that offers affection but demands you shrink yourself. A friendship that provides validation but requires you to participate in toxicity. These traps are harder to spot because they're wrapped in something desirable. The Stoics called this distinguishing between preferred indifference and virtue. There are things it's natural to prefer: comfort, wealth, pleasure, approval. But none of these things are worth compromising your character for. Virtue, living according to your values, maintaining your integrity, preserving your peace, is the only thing that actually matters. Everything else is negotiable. When you really internalize this, most emotional traps become obvious because you can see the price they're asking you to pay. Marcus Aurelius had access to unlimited pleasure and power, yet he constantly reminded himself that these external things were not what made life worthwhile. He wrote, "Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking." This isn't about being ascetic or denying yourself good things. It's about not being trapped by them, not needing them so badly that you'll compromise what actually matters to get them. When you don't need external things desperately, when your well-being doesn't depend on getting specific outcomes, emotional traps lose most of their leverage. The trap depends on you wanting something badly enough that you'll react emotionally to threats against it. But if you want things lightly, if you hold preferences without attachment, if you're okay whether you get the thing or not, then the threat loses its power. This is why the Stoics practiced voluntary discomfort, fasting occasionally, sleeping on hard surfaces sometimes, deliberately experiencing mild hardship. Not because suffering is good, but because experiencing that you can handle discomfort and lack means you stop being so afraid of it. And when you're not afraid of discomfort or loss, you can't be manipulated through threats of those things. The emotional trap has nowhere to hook into you. Let's get more specific about the most common emotional traps and how to recognize them before you fall in. Because these traps follow patterns, and once you know the patterns, you develop the ability to spot them in real time. It's like learning to read body language or recognize logical fallacies. Once you've studied the pattern, you see it everywhere. The first major category is the guilt trap. Someone makes you feel responsible for their emotional state or their problems, and if you don't do what they want, you're a bad person. They're unhappy, and somehow that's your fault. They're struggling, and you're selfish if you don't drop everything to help. They're disappointed, and you've let them down. The trap works by exploiting your natural empathy and your desire to be a good person. The Stoic response starts with a clear principle. You are not responsible for other adults' emotional states. You're responsible for your actions and their direct consequences. But you're not responsible for how people choose to interpret those actions or how they choose to feel about them. This doesn't mean being callous or cruel. It means recognizing that trying to control or manage other people's emotions is both impossible and disrespectful of their agency. Epictetus was blunt about this. He taught that people disturb themselves through their own judgments, not through external events. When someone is upset, they're upset because of how they're interpreting what happened, not because of what happened. You can't fix their interpretation. Only they can. If you take responsibility for their emotional state, you're falling into a trap that has no bottom. You'll spend your entire life trying to manage something you have no actual control over. The guilt trap often comes from people close to you, family, partners, old friends. They know your soft spots, your desire to be good and caring. And they've learned, often unconsciously, that making you feel guilty is an effective way to get what they want. The trap isn't necessarily malicious. Many people genuinely believe their interpretation of your actions, genuinely feel hurt or disappointed. But their genuine feelings don't obligate you to compromise your own boundaries or needs. The way out of the guilt trap is to clearly distinguish between genuine obligation and manufactured obligation. You have genuine obligations to people you've made commitments to dependents you're responsible for, to people you've harmed. These are real, but manufactured obligation, the sense that you should do something just because someone wants you to, or because they'll be upset if you don't, this is not real obligation. It's emotional manipulation, even if the manipulator isn't consciously manipulating. The second major trap is the comparison trap. Someone highlights how others are better, more successful, more attractive, more whatever than you. The trap works by activating your insecurity and making you compete, making you prove yourself, making you change your behavior to measure up to some external standard they've set. Social media has industrialized this trap, but it's ancient. The Romans dealt with it constantly. Who has more wealth, more status, more influence? Marcus Aurelius had to actively fight against this trap despite being the most powerful man in the world. He reminded himself, "The opinion of 10,000 men is of no value if they are not men of sense." He knew that comparison is meaningless unless you respect the standards being used to compare. And most standards are arbitrary, based on values you may not even share. Why would you let someone else's measurement of success make you feel inadequate? The Stoic solution to the comparison trap is to have your own clear values and measure yourself only against those. Not against what others have or achieve, but against who you're trying to become according to your own principles. Are you living with integrity? Are you developing your character? Are you contributing meaningfully? These are questions only you can answer for yourself, and they're the only questions that matter. Everything else is noise designed to pull you into games you didn't agree to play. The comparison trap is particularly insidious because it doesn't feel like manipulation. It feels like reality. Look at what they've achieved and you haven't. This sounds like just stating facts. But the framing is the manipulation. It implies that their achievement diminishes you, that their success is your failure, that you should be measuring yourself against them in the first place. All of these implications are traps. The third major trap is the scarcity trap. Someone creates artificial urgency or artificial scarcity to make you act impulsively rather than thoughtfully. This opportunity won't last. If you don't decide now, it'll be gone. Everyone else is doing it. The trap works by activating your fear of missing out and your fear of loss, both of which shut down your rational thinking and make you react from anxiety rather than from consideration. Seneca wrote about this explicitly. He warned against people who try to rush you into decisions, who won't let you think clearly, who pressure you to commit before you're ready. He said these people are either incompetent or malicious. Incompetent if they don't realize how poor decisions made under pressure tend to be. Malicious if they're deliberately preventing you from thinking clearly because they know you'll refuse if you do think clearly. The Stoic principle is simple. Legitimate opportunities can withstand scrutiny and consideration. If someone won't let you think about it, won't let you sleep on it, won't let you consult with others or consider alternatives, that's not an opportunity. That's a trap. Real opportunities don't require you to abandon your judgment. Traps do. And the way out is equally simple. Refuse to make significant decisions under pressure. If it won't wait for you to think clearly, you don't want it. The fourth trap is the validation trap. Someone gives you praise, attention, or approval, and then gradually makes that conditional on your behavior changing in ways that benefit them. The trap works by getting you addicted to their validation and then using your addiction to control you. This is particularly common in romantic relationships and in workplace dynamics, but it appears everywhere. The pattern is, first, they validate you freely. You feel seen, appreciated, valued. This feels good, naturally. Then, subtly, the validation becomes conditional. You get it when you do what they want. You don't get it when you don't. You may not even consciously notice the shift, but your behavior starts changing to keep the validation coming. Before you realize it, you're performing for approval, and they're controlling your performance. Epictetus taught, if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. This is directly addressing the validation trap. He's saying, if you need others' approval to feel okay about yourself, you can be controlled by anyone willing to withhold that approval. But if your content being misunderstood, content being disapproved of, content standing alone if necessary, then the validation trap has no power over you. The Stoic practice here is to cultivate internal validation. Approve of yourself when you act according to your values. Disapprove of yourself when you don't. Make your own judgment the court of appeal. Other people's opinions can be interesting data, but they're not determinative. This doesn't mean being arrogant or closed to feedback. It means having clear enough values that you can judge yourself against them without needing external confirmation. The fifth trap is the drama trap. Someone creates chaos, crisis, or conflict that demands your emotional energy and attention. The trap works by making you think you need to solve their crisis, calm their chaos, or mediate their conflict. But actually, the drama is often serving a purpose for them. It gets attention, it avoids responsibility, it controls the narrative. And your participation in it enables and reinforces the pattern. The Stoics were clear about this. Not every problem is your problem to solve. Not every crisis is your crisis to manage. Not every conflict is your conflict to mediate. You can have compassion for people in difficult situations without taking responsibility for fixing those situations, especially when the situations are largely self-created and recurring. The drama trap depends on you not seeing this distinction. Seneca advised his friends to be selective about what they allow into their minds. He wrote, "Associate with people who are likely to improve you. Welcome those whom you are capable of improving. Notice what's missing." He doesn't say waste your energy on people who create endless drama and expect you to clean it up. He's selective. He chooses relationships based on mutual growth, not on who needs the most attention. The way out of the drama trap is boundaries. You can care about someone without participating in their drama. You can offer support without taking responsibility. You can say, "That sounds difficult. What are you going to do about it?" instead of jumping in to solve it for them. And when someone's drama is clearly repetitive and self-created, you can choose not to engage with it at all, recognizing that your participation may actually be preventing them from facing consequences that would motivate change. Now that we've identified the common traps, let's talk about the meta skill that protects you from all of them: emotional awareness and regulation. Because the traps work by hijacking your automatic responses. They trigger emotions that bypass your rational thinking. The antidote is developing enough awareness to catch your emotional reactions before they control your behavior, and enough regulation skill to choose your response rather than just reacting. The Stoics called this prosage, attention, mindfulness, continuous self-monitoring. Marcus Aurelius practiced it constantly. He would watch his own thoughts and reactions, noting when he was being pulled off center, when he was reacting rather than responding, when he was falling into patterns he knew weren't useful. This wasn't self-criticism, it was self-observation. He was simply noticing what was happening in his own consciousness so he could make better choices. Modern psychology calls this metacognition, thinking about your thinking. And research consistently shows that people with strong metacognitive skills make better decisions, have better relationships, and experience less anxiety and depression. Why? Because they're not completely identified with their immediate thoughts and feelings. There's a part of them that can step back and observe, can question whether the thought is accurate or the feeling is proportionate, can choose whether to act on impulse or to pause and consider. This capacity is learnable. It's not something you either have or don't have. It's a skill you develop through practice. The basic practice is simple. Pause regularly throughout your day and check in with yourself. What am I feeling right now? What am I thinking? Is this reaction proportionate to what's actually happening? Am I falling into a familiar pattern? Am I being emotionally manipulated? These questions create space. They interrupt the automatic flow from trigger to reaction. And in that space, you have options. You can choose a response that aligns with your values rather than just reacting from your conditioning. This is the Stoic discipline of attention, and it's the foundation for outsmarting emotional traps. But awareness alone isn't enough. You also need regulation, the ability to manage your emotional state rather than being helplessly carried along by it. The Stoics developed several techniques for this, and modern psychology has validated their effectiveness while adding new ones. Let's look at the most powerful combination of ancient and modern approaches. First, cognitive reframing, changing how you interpret events to change how you feel about them. This is core Stoic practice. Epictetus taught, "Men are disturbed not by things, but by the views which they take of them." When something happens, you tell yourself a story about what it means. Change the story, and you change the emotional response. Someone cuts you off in traffic. Story 1. That person disrespected me. They think they're more important than me. They're an asshole. This story generates anger. Story 2. That person is probably distracted or dealing with something difficult, or maybe they just didn't see me. This story generates much less anger, maybe even compassion. The external event is identical. Your emotional response is entirely dependent on which story you tell yourself. The Stoic practice is to habitually choose the story that serves you best. Not the story that makes you feel most justified in your anger or hurt, but the story that allows you to maintain your peace and act wisely. This isn't about lying to yourself or denying reality. It's about recognizing that you're always interpreting reality, and you might as well interpret it in ways that help rather than harm you. Second, physiological regulation, managing your body state to influence your emotional state. The Stoics understood that mind and body are interconnected, that your physical state affects your mental state. When you're tense, hungry, tired, or in pain, you're much more vulnerable to emotional traps. Your regulation capacity is depleted. Your judgment is impaired. You react more quickly and less wisely. The practice is straightforward. Maintain your body. Sleep enough. Eat regularly and well. Move your body daily. When you feel emotional reactivity rising, check your physical state first. Are you actually angry about what just happened, or are you just tired and irritable? Is this situation actually unbearable, or are you just hungry? Often, addressing the physical need dissolves the emotional intensity. Modern research on self-control shows that it functions like a muscle. It can be temporarily depleted but can also be strengthened over time. When you're depleted, tired, hungry, stressed, your capacity to resist emotional traps is much lower. The Stoics practiced maintaining their reserves through regular discipline, simple living, regular routines, avoiding excess. Not because excess is morally wrong, but because it depletes your capacity for self-regulation. Third, premeditation, preparing in advance for situations that typically trigger you. This is premeditatio malorum, one of the core Stoic practices. Before going into a situation you know is challenging, mentally rehearse how you want to respond. Imagine the traps you're likely to encounter. Decide in advance how you'll handle them. This pre-commitment makes it much more likely you'll actually follow through when the moment comes. For example, you know you're going to see someone who typically provokes you. Before the interaction, sit quietly and imagine it. Imagine them saying the provocative thing. Imagine feeling the irritation rise. And then imagine yourself pausing, breathing, choosing not to take the bait. Visualize yourself handling it well. This mental rehearsal literally prepares your brain for the actual situation. When it happens, you'll have already practiced the response you want, making it more automatic. Fourth, the discipline of assent, the practice of not immediately accepting your first impression or emotional reaction as true. This is advanced Stoic technique. When something happens and you have an immediate reaction, pause before acting on it. Treat your initial impression as a hypothesis to be tested, not as established fact. Ask, is this actually true? Is there another way to see this? Am I making assumptions? This discipline prevents you from being jerked around by your automatic reactions. You feel insulted, but are you actually being insulted, or are you reading insult into an ambiguous comment? You feel rejected, but are you actually being rejected, or is this person just preoccupied with their own issues? You feel threatened, but is there actually a threat, or are you just anxious? The discipline of assent creates a buffer between perception and belief, preventing emotional traps from hijacking your perception. Fifth, the practice of dichotomy of control, obsessively distinguishing between what you control and what you don't. This is perhaps the most fundamental Stoic practice. You control your own choices, thoughts, and responses. You don't control external events, other people's actions, outcomes, or circumstances. Most emotional traps work by getting you focused on what you can't control, generating anxiety and reactivity around things that are not actually up to you. The practice is to constantly redirect your attention back to what you control. Someone is trying to provoke you. You don't control their behavior, but you control your response. A situation didn't turn out how you wanted. You don't control outcomes, but you control how you interpret and respond to this one. Someone is disappointed in you. You don't control their feelings, but you control whether you've acted according to your values. This constant redirection keeps you focused on your actual power rather than on your imagined power over things beyond your control. When you combine these practices, reframing, physiological regulation, premeditation, discipline of assent, and dichotomy of control, you develop a robust system for emotional regulation that makes you extremely difficult to manipulate. Not because you're cold or unfeeling, but because you're aware, prepared, and disciplined. You see the traps coming. You recognize your automatic reactions. And you choose responses based on your values rather than based on your triggers. As we move toward the conclusion, we need to address something crucial: the difference between outsmarting emotional traps and becoming emotionally shut down. Because there's a version of this teaching that can be misunderstood as, don't feel things, don't trust people, don't engage emotionally with life. That's not what the Stoics taught, and it's not what emotional wisdom looks like. The goal isn't to eliminate emotion or to become invulnerable to being affected by others. The goal is to be emotionally engaged with life while not being emotionally controlled by circumstances. It's to feel deeply while also seeing clearly. It's to care about people while not being manipulated by them. This is a subtle distinction, but an absolutely critical one. Marcus Aurelius loved deeply. He grieved when his children died. He worried about the empire. He cared about his teachers and friends. His private writings show a person of profound feeling, not an emotionless robot. But his feelings didn't control him. He felt them, acknowledged them, and still acted from wisdom rather than from reactive emotion. This is emotional maturity, not emotional suppression. The trap version of Stoicism, the misunderstanding, leads to people who are defended and closed off, who trust no one, who refuse to be vulnerable because vulnerability might be exploited. These people think they're being stoic, but actually they're just scared. They've built walls instead of developing awareness. They've chosen safety over growth, and they end up isolated and bitter, unable to form genuine connections because they're so focused on not being manipulated. Real Stoic wisdom looks different. It's someone who can be fully present and vulnerable with people who've earned that trust, while also being able to immediately recognize manipulation and respond to it appropriately. It's someone who engages deeply with life while maintaining the clarity to see emotional traps. It's someone who cares without being controlled by their caring. How do you develop this balance? How do you engage emotionally without falling into traps? The answer is calibration. You calibrate your openness and trust based on what people show you about who they are. You don't start from a position of either total trust or total suspicion. You start from a position of neutral observation, and you let people's behavior inform your level of engagement. When someone consistently shows they're trustworthy, that they respect boundaries, that they engage with you authentically without manipulation, you can be more open with them. You can be vulnerable. You can care deeply without constant vigilance because they've demonstrated they won't exploit that vulnerability. These are the relationships worth investing in, worth being emotionally present for, worth the risk that comes with caring. When someone consistently shows they're manipulative, that they push boundaries, that they use emotional tactics to control you, you calibrate differently. You maintain distance. You engage with appropriate caution. You don't give them ammunition in the form of your vulnerabilities. This isn't being cold or shut down. It's being wise. You're simply matching your level of openness to what they've shown you they can be trusted with. The Stoics were selective about relationships for precisely this reason. They valued quality over quantity. They cultivated